Good morning, Europe. Welcome to the program. Our top stories for you this hour. France floods. After the extreme heat comes heavy flooding in southern France, with one person missing and 1,600 evacuated. Yemen airstrike. The UN calls for an independent investigation into a Saudi-led coalition airstrike that killed at least 29 children in the northern province of Sada. Turbulence ahead. Hundreds of flights are cancelled as Ryanair pilots in 5 EU countries go on strike over working conditions. And over in the Cube, our social media news desk.
And Tesa, tensions are flaring up between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. We've got the latest verified video showing one of the most recent attacks.
Close encounter. NASA gets ready to send its new probe closer to the sun than any spacecraft has been before. And we meet descendants of the Italian painter Caravaggio. There's a town full of them. Thank you for starting your morning with us. Our top story, 1,600 people have been evacuated and one person is missing after severe flooding in southern France. Rescue divers have been called in after a 70-year-old German man who was supervising children is believed to have taken shelter inside a caravan before it was swept away in torrential downpours. Well, the floods come after an extreme heat wave that hit much of Europe. Euronews' Philip Churm has this story.
They'd planned for some peace and sunshine, but found themselves on a holiday from hell as 1,600 people were evacuated from areas of southern France. Most of them were campers whose tents were unable to hold out against the torrential rain and strong winds. The severe flooding comes after much of southern Europe, including areas of France, experienced unusually hot weather. More than 400 firefighters and other emergency services were helping out, along with 4 helicopters. The first thing was that I set up a device to make a quick reconnaissance to identify where people were hanging onto trees. They were adults and especially children. With teams in pairs, we first secured people to the trees. We fixed them and then after a while they were evacuated. But we did the rescue operation because the people were hypothermic. In one camp alone in Saint-Julien-de-Pérola, almost 120 children were evacuated in a major rescue operation. But as the extreme weather conditions took their toll on the rivers, roads and countryside, the emergency services faced some huge challenges. We had to make sure there were no more stranded people that hadn't been counted to eliminate all doubt as to potential victims. 4 German children were taken to hospital after suffering from hypothermia. 10 people were treated for minor injuries. And for those inside their own houses, there was no escape from the weather. My roof can take winds of up to 130 kilometers an hour. I don't have a roof anymore, so that means it must have blown at least 150 or 160 kilometers an hour. The cleanup will continue for a long time, as will the process of counting the cost of the damage. And for thousands of campers in southern France, their holiday is well and truly over. Philip Churm, Euronews.
The United Nations has called for an independent investigation into a Saudi-led coalition airstrike on a marketplace in Yemen that killed dozens of civilians. 29 children were among the 43 victims of the missile attack. This report from Euronews' Chris Pilcher contains pictures that some viewers may find disturbing.
Plastic body bags containing the bodies of children killed after airstrikes hit their bus travelling through a market in northern Yemen. The Sada Health Department says it left 43 dead and another 63 injured. The Saudi-led coalition who fired the missiles have accused its targets, the Iranian-aligned Houthi group, of using the children as human shields. The strike happened in the middle of the market and it targeted a bus carrying children. Our shops were open and shoppers were walking around as usual. All of those who died were residents, children and shop owners. The airstrikes landed in the area of Dayan in northern Yemen's Sada province. The coalition insists it acted within international law, targeting the Houthis' missile launchers allegedly being used to attack the Saudi city of Jazan. But the Houthis say a clear disregard for civilian life has been shown. Chris Pilcher, Euronews.
The U.S. State Department has backed the United Nations call for an independent investigation into the strike, but the spokesperson, Heather Nauert, also blamed Iran for arming Houthi rebels in the region.
Let's look at some of the things that have been happening in Yemen. You have the Houthi rebels who continue to attack Saudi Arabia. They continue to do that with Iranian weapons, missiles, and rockets. They continue to try to attack civilian infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, for example, and that is part of the reason why these actions are being taken.
Well, I'm joined now on the phone from Yemen by Mirella Hodeib from the International Committee of the Red Cross. Thank you for joining us today. Now, your staff, they've been on the front line. They've been treating the victims of this attack. What can you tell us about the situation that they've had to confront?
Well, our staff at the ICU-supported Asal Hospital had received patients since the morning non-stop in Sada yesterday following the attacks on the market in Dahyan. So they were really struggling to deal with the influx of dead and wounded that came to the hospital. It started becoming a bit quieter in the afternoon. So according to our teams, we received 29 identified dead bodies of children under 15 and 48 injured, among them 30 children. Now, the overall toll could be higher because according to local officials in Sada, they are speaking about 50 people dead and 77 injured. The International Committee of the Red Cross also was quick to dispatch surgical material and medical equipment to other hospitals in the northern governorate that were also taking in casualties.
Yeah, and Mirella, you know, the Saudi-led coalition, they've issued a statement. They were accusing the Houthi rebels of using the children as human shields, and they say that what they did was in accordance with international law. That was their defense. What is the Red Cross's view on that?
Well, the ICRC calls publicly and bilaterally with all those involved in the conflict in Yemen to spare and protect civilians. And we insist on all those concerned to respect and ensure respect for the rules and principles of international humanitarian law and do everything feasible to verify that the objectives to be attacked are not civilians. We always encourage parties to the conflict to treat children as victims of the conflict first. Children should not pay the price for a very adult war.
Yeah, and just very quickly, Mirella, in terms of aid, you were talking about getting it in there, medical aid. Is there any problem getting in those supplies into the country?
Well, of course. I mean, Yemen has been, in a conflict for almost 3 or almost 4 years now. So there is difficulty in the pipeline of getting aid in. But thankfully, the aid the International Committee of the Red Cross had in Sada was pre-positioned, and we were quick to dispatch it to the hospitals. But then again, this aid is not enough. I mean, across Yemen, humanitarian aid enough would not really treat the people or provide food and shelter for millions of Yemenis who need it.
All right, thank you very much for that. Mirella Hodeib talking to us there from the International Committee of the Red Cross, and she was in Yemen. Thank you. Now, Ryanair pilots in Germany are striking for 24 hours today and forcing the cancellation of some 250 flights there. This adds to industrial action already planned for today in Ireland, Sweden, Belgium and the Netherlands. The strike is over improved pay and conditions. And we're joined now from Berlin's Schönefeld Airport by correspondent Jessica Saltz. Jessica, can you give us a background of why the strike is taking place?
Well, these strikes are happening after a standoff this week between Ryanair and several European pilots' unions over salary disputes and also pilots demanding fairer working conditions. The German pilots' union Cockpit, which has 480 pilots stationed in Germany, is also critical of what it says is Ryanair's tendency to move around pilots to different bases in Europe at very short notice. The strike began at 3 a.m. this morning and is expected to continue for 24 hours. Pilots also striking from Belgium, Ireland, Sweden and the Netherlands. But it is likely that tensions between Ryanair and these unions will continue after the strike has finished, with both sides being very vocally critical of each other and very much pointing the finger of blame at each other for this strike.
Yeah, and in Germany, we know that over 200 flights have been cancelled, but it's a bigger chaos, I guess, across Europe because of all those other strikes. Like, what can you tell us about cancellations across Europe and how this can be resolved?
Well, Well, so of the 2,400 Europe-wide Ryanair flights planned for today, 400 of those have been cancelled, and of those 400, 250 were supposed to be flying in and out of Germany. So 55,000 passengers over Europe expected to be affected. Of those, 42,000 passengers again have been flying in and out of Germany. I'm here at Berlin's Schönefeld Airport, which is Ryanair's most used airport in Germany. And this area behind me, these check-in desks would usually be occupied by Ryanair, and they would usually at this time on an August morning be absolutely full of passengers. But I've been speaking to representatives from Ryanair here this morning. They've told me that they've been informing passengers as well ahead of time as they could that their flights have been cancelled or delayed to avoid much disruption. As you can see, there haven't been many passengers turning up this morning because they were informed beforehand, and Ryanair said they're helping to get them onto other flights. But of course, this is going to cost the airline greatly.
All right, thank you for that. Jessica Saltz talking to us there from Berlin. Thank you. And still to come for you on the program, wildfires in Portugal continue to burn as the Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Costa warned that it could still take many more days to put out the fires. And France said that it's ready to take some of the 87 migrants from the rescue boat Open Arms that docked in southern Spain on Thursday. We'll be back after a short break. A recap of your top story. France floods. Extreme flooding in southern France has forced the evacuation of more than 1,600 people, many of whom were campers. One person is still missing. Wildfires continue to rage in Portugal's Algarve region as hundreds of firefighters struggle to contain the destruction. Thousands of people have already been evacuated from the popular tourist region, but strong winds fanning the flames mean that it's a race against time. Euronews' Filipa Suarez went to the area of Monchique, where fires have spread to over 17,000 hectares.
One of Europe's most popular destinations has been ravaged by these forest fires, causing huge disruption for tourists and locals.
It was like a fiery hell. It started on that side first. It came down the hill and it was indescribable. I can't put into words what I've seen.
José António refused to leave his house when the authorities evacuated Caldas de Monchique. Célia Neves left her mother's hostel, but only for 6 hours.
I think if people are completely healthy, there's no reason why they shouldn't be allowed to stay in their own home and defend it.
Célia's hostel was full of tourists when the fire approached their swimming pool. Now it is empty, much like the rest of the village. This restaurant was totally destroyed by flames after the owner left to seek safety with friends in the nearby coastal town of Portimão.
Because the local government, the Câmara, didn't cut the trees down here. And I just talked to the fireman here 2 hours ago, and GNR, and they says we can never control it if we have big trees like that behind or around the house.
That was Filipa Suarez there reporting from Portugal. Well, now the French government has said it will take in a number of migrants from the rescue boat Open Arms that docked in southern Spain yesterday. After spending a week in international waters, the boat carrying 87 people rescued near Libya was permitted to make landfall in the port of Algeciras by Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez. The boat had previously been refused entry by both Malta and Italy, and France says it will take in around 20 of those on board. Well, joining us live now from Valencia is Euronews correspondent Annelise Borges. Annelise, can you tell us why the French government decided to do this?
Well, Tessa, France is trying to show that it will make good on its promise to help Spain in this difficult moment that the country is trying to deal with an increase in the influx of people arriving here in Spain. As many as 23,000 asylum seekers, refugees and migrants have reached European shores via Spain so far this year. And France says it understands, it is aware of the burden that this is placing on Spain, and it wants to help. It wants to share responsibility in the name of European solidarity. And this follows a decision made by France back in June to take in some 78 asylum seekers who arrived here in Spain aboard the Aquarius, that NGO ship that had become the center of a diplomatic crisis that actually threatened to split Europe apart, because he revealed these unresolved fault lines in European policy, especially with regards to migration and how to deal with migration, how to share responsibility for those who arrive here in Europe, escaping poverty and conflict.
Yeah, and for those who have docked, I mean, it is the end of one journey and the beginning of another one. What is next for them?
Absolutely, Tessa. Those who have arrived in Algeciras on Thursday will be going through that normal process of registration. That process involves interviews, but also medical examinations. A group of officials from France will be coming here to Spain to examine the cases of those who say they are interested in traveling to France. But of course, this process will be a long and laborious one. It can take up to 2 years for these people to actually be granted asylum. And out of the 87 who arrived in Algeciras on Thursday, 12 are minors. They are mostly from Sudan, and they will not be granted that special permit that was actually granted to migrants who arrived aboard Aquarius. Those people could stay here in Spain for 45 days before requesting asylum. That will not be the case for those who arrived on Thursday. They will have to decide straight away whether they want to request asylum, or they will be deported back to the place where they came from.
All right, thank you for that, Andy Sportes, reporting there from Valencia in Spain. Thanks. And still to come for you on the program, a state of emergency has been declared in Charlottesville, Virginia, on the anniversary of the Unite the Right rally as the town prepares itself for demonstrations this weekend. And over in the Cube,
violence is flaring up between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Here in the Cube, we have the latest verified video showing one of the most recent attacks.
You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. A state of emergency has been declared in Charlottesville in preparation for the anniversary of last year's white nationalist rally. One woman died and many others were injured as white supremacists and alt-right supporters swarmed the city in August 2017. Now, counter-protesters and police clashed with a group on a day of violence that shook America. In the aftermath, Donald Trump fanned the flames of division in the U.S., refusing to park the blame with a white supremacist. Well, joining me now to talk about the preparations is Euronews correspondent Alistair Sanford. So, Alistair, they're preparing for this. What are they expecting really to happen on Sunday?
Yes, well, the police admitted that there were inadequate preparations last year. They failed to anticipate those clashes between the alt-right and the counter-protesters, and this despite plenty of warnings. So, as you'd expect, the security this time is pretty tight, and there's going to be a big police presence. There's a state of emergency. Now, that means that Virginia can access state resources, including the National Guard, if necessary. The authorities have vowed zero tolerance in Charlottesville. Downtown's been closed off to vehicles. Now, the organizer of the Unite the Right 2 rally withdrew the request for permission to demonstrate in Charlottesville. Instead, the permission's been given for a demonstration in Washington on Sunday outside the White House. Now, of course, last year, there was shock and surprise at the sheer scale of this white nationalist rally. Hundreds of people, a very intimidating presence with torches, racist slogans, and of course, amid the clashes, as we've heard, with the counter-protesters afterwards, there was one woman, a counter-protester, Heather Heyer, who was killed when a car drove at speed into the crowd, and since then a man's been charged with murder.
And we know of that comment that Donald Trump made. It was really a contentious comment because he refused to lay blame on the alt-right following.
Yes, this caused outrage. I mean, he did condemn the killing and said the man who did that was a murderer. But generally on the violence, remember his expression, kind of, there was violence on all sides. He described the white nationalists as having been innocently protesting. And said that on the one side you had people who were bad, on the other very violent. So his critics said, of course, well, you can't bring in moral equivalence here. It's really, you've got to call out white supremacists and neo-Nazis where they exist. Beyond that, it's really, however, exposed, if you like, divisions over the American racial history. He touched a raw nerve and exposed divisions that are still there 150 years after the Civil War. And all this began with the build-up of protests against the removal of Confederate statues. Trump had defended those who were protesting against the removal of those statues. And in Charlottesville today, the effects are still being felt. A lot of people thought that it was a peaceful, progressive city, but in fact it's exposed inequality and racial strife. There have been council meetings reportedly turned into shouting matches. That said, there are a number of events planned to commemorate last year's events this weekend, and it's hoped they will be peaceful.
Indeed, we have seen a lot of tension in Charlottesville. Thank you for that, Alistair Sanford. Now, people in the UK would rather the public, not Parliament, vote on the terms of Brexit should the country leave the EU without a deal. A poll by YouGov found that 50% of people wanted a national referendum if no deal was negotiated, compared to 25% who said it should be politicians voting in Parliament. The results also showed that the majority of people in the UK believe that the negotiations between Britain and the EU were going badly. A mechanic helping to fight one of the several major wildfires in California has been killed in a traffic accident, bringing the number of dead in the blaze to 8. 40-year-old Andrew Brake was assigned to the car fire burning around Redding in Northern California. He was killed on Highway 99 in nearby Tehama County. President Emmanuel Macron will speak with Russian leader Vladimir Putin in a call today about the jailed Ukrainian film director Oleg Sentsov. Sentsov has been on hunger strike since May and is gravely ill, according to a source in his office in the Elysee. He was imprisoned on what he says are political charges and began his hunger strike ahead of the World Cup to highlight Russia's human rights record. And coming up for you on the program, we will have the 6th American military service. Now, the U.S. has announced plans for a space force, plus the controversy over a new Oscars category will be live in Los Angeles. And in this last of our series on descendants, we will be meeting living relatives of the Italian painter Caravaggio. But first, here's our no comment of the day from Cardiff in Wales, where the winner of the Tour de France, Geraint Thomas, had a hero's welcome at his homecoming parade.
Ladies and gents, Max Boyce! His dedication, his professionalism to his sport. Rubbing it in my face, I was on the espresso.
Your top stories in Good Morning Europe. France floods. After the extreme heat comes heavy flooding in southern France, with 1 missing and 1,600 people evacuated. Yemen airstrike. The UN calls for an independent investigation into a Saudi-led coalition airstrike that killed at least 29 children in the northern province of Sada. Turbulence ahead. Hundreds of flights are cancelled as Ryanair pilots in 5 EU countries go on strike over working conditions. Close encounter. NASA gets ready to send its new probe closer to the sun than any spacecraft has ever been before. Now, there have been conflicting reports of a late-night truce made between Israeli authorities and the officials of the Hamas militant group after a 2-day flare-up of violence that led to civilian deaths. Now, the Cube have been working very hard to verify the facts around this story. Cindy?
Well, Tessa, the Israeli airstrikes were in response to rockets fired from Gaza. Now, Reuters has quoted Palestinian officials as saying that there is a truce in place. However, an unnamed Israel official says there is no truce. But this is what we do know. There was a latest explosion on Thursday in northern Gaza in an area called Al Ramal. And we have the aftermath of an explosion. It was taken by drone, just showing you the devastation in the area. Now, the Cube team have been working really hard to verify the location where this took place, and that's why we're joined now by Rachel Kennedy here in the Cube team. Good morning, Rachel.
Hi.
So how are you exactly able to figure out where this took place, the location of this airstrike?
So we took a screenshot of the video, the drone video that the source released, and this is where the rubble is. You can see the rubble here from where the airstrike took place. And we took place markers from this video, so you see the tall building here. You can see like the road that runs alongside it, the rubble, and this green space here. And we compared these place markers with satellite imagery on Google Earth, which I'll bring up now. So this is the satellite imagery of the Al Ramal area in Gaza, and you can see again here is the tall building that I just pointed out. We had the road here that runs alongside, and then this is the building that was bombed, and this hasn't been updated, so you can still see the building here. It's not rubble here, and you can see the green spaces opposite. So you know that this airstrike did happen, and we can confirm the location in Gaza where it happened.
And we also have the video as well, so we can see the aftermath of what that explosion looks like. And this was taken from a drone taken from media outlets, Sahil Media. They took this showing the devastation. So what we know is that an explosion took place. What we also know is the location, as verified by Rachel and the Cube team. What we don't know, though, is what actually was in that building. So according to a Facebook page, the Facebook page for this building, it was a cultural center. But that's not exactly what Israel has been saying. The Israeli Defense Forces do confirm that there was a 5-story building in Ramal that was struck. However, the IDF doesn't call this a cultural center. Instead, they say that this was actively used by Hamas military operatives. So there are conflicting reports of what actually was in fact bombed. But a Hamas spokesperson in a tweet in Arabic calls this a barbaric attack. The UN has also been tweeting, and they've basically said that they are deeply alarmed by this escalation of violence. So again, this is what we do know. We know that there was this strike. We know the location of the strike as verified by the Cube team. But what's unclear right now is what actually that building was. What was targeted? What was inside that building? As well, there are conflicting reports of whether or not there is a truce. Tessa.
All right, thank you for that, Cindy and team. Thanks. Now, yesterday's third earthquake in Indonesia is hampering the already difficult rescue efforts and delaying reconstruction. The aftershocks have been coming all week, but Thursday's was the biggest yet. Paul Ging has the story.
Hundreds dead, thousands injured, and a landscape devastated by earthquakes on the Indonesian island of Lombok. A magnitude 6.2 aftershock on Thursday sparked fresh panic, and it's the third huge quake since Sunday. Officials in charge of coordinating the disaster say that the death toll is even higher than they originally thought. The latest data I received from the Chief of Operations says that the death toll is 319 people. After this meeting, I hope that all the official figures will remain the same. But along with hundreds now dead, almost 1,500 are now known to be injured, and around 250,000 people displaced. Some villages are reported to have completely collapsed, and families are desperate to protect young and old. In his news conference, the Minister for Political, Legal and Security Affairs said the government will develop a plan to rebuild communities on Lombok. And while emergency workers are still trying to reach more remote areas of the island, in some areas, people are beginning to assess the damage to their property and want to rebuild their lives as soon as they possibly can. Fix the infrastructure, most importantly the water system and the electricity here. That's what the local residents need so we can return to normal life. We also hope that tourism on this island will return to normal soon. There are many stories of tragedy, destruction and panic. Some who have only suffered minor damage are thankful, but also fearful about what could happen next. We were watching TV when the earthquake happened, and we ran out because there's been so many earthquakes. There are cracks in my room. That's why we're afraid. So as a precaution, we need to run out during the quakes. Rescue work will continue, but then begins the mammoth task of re-establishing the lives of those people who've lost everything in this destructive tragedy.
Paul Ging reporting there. Now, the White House has announced plans to extend U.S. military dominance into space with the creation of a new sixth branch of its armed forces called the Space Force. Well, the separate military department will bolster U.S. defenses, and the plan is for it to be operational by 2020. In a Pentagon address, Vice President Mike Pence spoke of a stronger, safer America, highlighting emerging threats from Russia and China.
Now the time has come to write the next great chapter in the history of our armed forces, to prepare for the next battlefield, where America's best and bravest will be called to deter and defeat a new generation of threats to our people, to our nation. The time has come to establish the United States Space Force.
Well, critics, however, have hit back at the announcement, saying that it is expensive and unnecessary. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell has a story.
Good morning. From a big idea to the wish list, and now it's Trump administration policy. President Trump wants to launch a new branch of the American military, adding what he calls the Space Force. It's controversial, and there are big questions about how quickly this could happen. But Vice President Mike Pence delivered a speech Thursday where he outlined some of the plans and put an ambitious goal, a Space Force by 2020. That also happens to be the year of the next presidential election. President Trump has said that the U.S. military needs to be the biggest and strongest, and it should consider going beyond the atmosphere to bolster U.S. defenses, things like satellites and capabilities that could protect the U.S. and friends as well. All of this new technology is something that is advancing quickly, and President Trump argues it needs to be its own separate branch of the U.S. military. Others say adding to the bureaucracy isn't smart, and the price tag is certainly eye-popping. $8 billion over 5 years. Still, the Pentagon has put together its initial plans for how this would work, and it would add to those other branches that we know so well: Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Air Force, Marines. And now Space Force is on the minds of the Trump administration, with the president looking skyward. I'm Kelly O'Donnell, NBC News, traveling with the president in New Jersey for Euronews.
And still to come on the program, a most popular film category is proving least popular with critics. Proposed changes to the Oscars have been met with a backlash in Hollywood. We'll be back after a short break. Your top story in Good Morning Europe: France floods. Extreme flooding in southern France has forced the evacuation of more than 1,600 people, many of whom were campers. One person is still missing. NASA is preparing to launch its new spacecraft tomorrow, and that's planned to fly closer to the sun than any other spacecraft has ever been. The Parker Solar Probe will be the first ever mission to travel 6 million kilometers from the sun's surface to send data back to Earth. Euronews' science correspondent Jeremy Wilkes has more.
If you think you're having a hot summer this year, then spare a thought for NASA's newest spacecraft. This is the Parker Solar Probe, and this Saturday it sets off on a journey to fly closer to the sun than any man-made object has ever flown before. It will go to about 6 million kilometers from the solar surface and face temperatures of 1,400 degrees Celsius.
This is a dangerous and potentially very rewarding mission, because the Parker Solar Probe will actually fly through the solar corona. That's the outer halo of gas around the sun, where phenomena like the solar wind, solar flares and coronal mass ejections are produced. Now, there's a lot to learn in this hellish environment, because what happens right next to the sun really impacts us here on Earth.
We've all seen the images of the Aurora Borealis and Australis, where the solar wind interacts with our upper atmosphere. And those ejections from the sun can actually damage satellites and even cause electricity blackouts in extreme cases.
So NASA scientists will use the Parker Solar Probe to sample the magnetic fields in the sun's corona, giving them a better chance at forecasting solar activity in the future. And they'll also have help in their mission from a new European spacecraft, ESA's Solar Orbiter, which will fly further away from the sun and image it with a complementary set of instruments.
Solar Orbiter is currently under construction by Airbus in the UK and will launch next year. So some serious scientific scrutiny of the sun is due, with NASA's Parker Solar Probe set for the hottest ever close encounter with our star. Jeremy Wilkes, Euronews.
Well, to Hollywood now, as the Academy Awards have sparked discussion by their addition of a popular film category. Popular film will look at movies that perform well at the box office, such as Black Panther, Mamma Mia, and Mission Impossible. Now, by including audience favorites, the Academy hope to encourage more people at home to watch the ceremony. Joining us now from Los Angeles is entertainment journalist Simon Thompson. Simon, why is the addition of this category so controversial?
Well, the changes in general really are controversial, but the Oscars are more about the art and craft of filmmaking than box office and popularity. Now, sometimes you do get a movie like Get Out that's in there for some of the major prizes these days, but usually it's more sort of the smaller movies, the art house movies. So it's more about the acclaim rather than the amount of money they've made. Also, we could see popular movies being removed from some of those major categories and kind of pushed off into this popular movie area, which, you know, sort of makes it less appealing to the everyday person who would go and watch movies in multiplexes and would hand over their money to see the films. We've yet to find out exactly what these changes are going to be and how that new popular movie category is going to work. We're going to find out very soon from the Academy. But also this year, I mean, if you're looking at popular movies, the biggest hit was Black Panther. Obviously, you've got the Avengers massively popular in there as well. Those above Marvel Disney movies, you've got Incredibles 2. The Star Wars movies always do phenomenally well. All of these are Disney movies, and ABC, the channel that shows the Oscars, is also a Disney channel. Now, also, don't forget that with ABC about to buy Fox, that means that that company's about to get a lot bigger. So a lot of people are thinking it might be a little bit unfair, purely on sort of market ownership alone.
And Simon, I mean, it seems that the Academy is rejigging, you know, they're making a lot of changes. What can we look forward to? I know you said that they haven't announced a lot of things yet, but just looking at the industry, where do you think these changes are going to be heading?
Well, it's probably likely that if you're sitting at home, I mean, audience figures for the Oscars have been going down for a number of years. And this year, we've seen the lowest figures for the longest time. Since 2014, they've gone down 39% alone. So it's really about having those categories and those appearances on TV that are really going to keep the audience watching for the longest amount of time. The things that will likely go, and we've yet to get this confirmed, is those technical categories, which are really important to people in the industry. But if you're sitting at home in Idaho or London, that's not really what you're interested in. You want to see celebrity names in movies that you know about. People are also saying, if the Academy are making these changes, isn't it about time that when you've got movies like Deadpool and the Avengers, some of the stunt people start to get recognition by the Oscars? A lot of people here in Hollywood have been pushing for that kind of art to be recognized. And if you're looking for movies that are popular, a lot of them have stunts in, that would definitely help. It's likely, though, they could also cut down on the number of songs that they have in the Oscars in that best song category too.
And Simon, I mean, we can't really talk about Hollywood now without touching on Me Too. Where do you think that is heading, the impact on Hollywood?
I mean, there continue to be improvements in that area and general representation as well, and the treatment of sort of women and minorities. And obviously, we've seen abuses by men in the industry too, on other men. We are starting to see changes. That is going to continue. There really is a very positive movement within Hollywood. And a lot of the Academy groups, whether you're the directors, writers, or the Academy itself, you are seeing a lot of those groups also pushing for this. They're self-policing, and it's something that still remains very much at the front of their minds, as well as more representation for different minorities, whether that's an ethnic minority or whether it's LGBTQ community.
All right, thank you for that. Simon Thompson, entertainment journalist, are talking to us from Los Angeles. Thanks. And still to come on Good Morning Europe, some residents in the Italian town of Caravaggio claim to be descendants of the famous painter. But how many are really distant relatives? DNA tests gave some surprising results. And over in the Cube,
the Thai boys trapped in the cave have been granted citizenship, but some are saying this also points to a bigger issue. We'll explain after the break.
You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Now, you might remember this story. It was covered around the world, the rescue of 12 boys and their football coach from a cave in northern Thailand. Well, Cindy in the Cube has an update for us.
It's a good news story, Tessa. You may or may not know this, but 3 of those Thai boys, as well as their coach, were actually stateless. They don't have papers. They were not citizens. But that all changed this week. Take a look at these pictures. This was released by the Thai government. They finally got their papers. This is the coach, as well as the boys there, clearly really happy about what has happened. This was one of the biggest international news stories. Just a month ago, if you'll remember, this was the moment when the boys were found in the cave after 3 weeks. They were rescued by an international team of rescuers. And now that they've gotten their citizenship, there has been no shortage of reaction online from people commenting about how good this is. For example, a spokesperson for the UN Refugee Agency, Melissa Fleming, tweeting, congratulating the Thai government and saying that Thailand has provided them with a formal identity that will pave the way for them to achieve their aspirations and to participate as full members of society, for them to belong. The UN Refugee Agency also sending out this tweet saying that this is a shining example of how positive action by a state can aid people in quickly resolve their stateless situation. But this is also pointing to a bigger issue as well. And Erin Harris with the Asian Development Bank, which is a regional development bank, pointed this out in this tweet. She says it's great to see that the boys and their coach were granted citizenship, but the problem of statelessness in the region remains huge. This is especially a problem amongst the rural tribes, amongst ethnic minorities as well in Thailand. So even though there's a lot of positive reaction there, a lot of people are saying, well, wait a minute, this also points to a bigger issue in Thailand. According to the UN, there is nearly 500,000 people without their papers. And these boys, by the way, were reportedly born in the country as well. And here they are again. This is their coach. This is one of the three boys who's obviously really, really happy about getting his papers, as well as the two other boys here. There was a fourth member of this football team who was not trapped in the cave. He also was able to get his citizenship. And by the way, they all applied for citizenship before the incident in the cave. So that is the good news story for today. Tesa.
All right, thank you for that. Nice to hear that. Cindy and the CUBE team, thanks. Now, we all know how DNA testing helps detectives solve cold cases, but now in the Italian town of Caravaggio, the same techniques are helping historians track down descendants of some of the world's most famous artists. NBC's Claudio Lavanga has the story.
As many artists during the Renaissance, Caravaggio named himself after the town he came from. His real name was Michelangelo Merisi. The town still exists, and many there still carry his surname.
Sono Pepe Merisio. Mi chiamo Alberto Merisio e sono un discendente del Caravaggio.
Could all the people carrying the artist's last name today in the town of Caravaggio have the same blood of the painter running through their veins? In 2010, a group of Italian scientists tried to find an answer to this enigma.
Nel 1610 a Porto Ercole morì Caravaggio. Venne sepolto in un cimiterino di San Sebastiano. Nel 1956 vennero disseppelliti molti resti mortali. Esame istologico, cioè per determinare l'età tra i diversi resti mortali. Uno solo rispondeva 40 anni. Esame dei metalli pesanti per accertare la presenza di piombo. Era un pittore, mangiava coi colori.
With Caravaggio's alleged bones in hand, Silvano Vincetti and a team of scientists set out to the town to test everybody there called Merisio. They hoped that if the DNA matched, it would prove they correctly identified the painter's remains.
E cominciamo a fare i prelievi del loro DNA per fare il confronto e cercare di riuscire a risolvere questo enigma.
Alberto and the great painter have three things in common: the town they come from, the surname, and the talent for painting. But according to the scientists, they also share the same DNA.
Quando ho ricevuto la telefonata di convocazione mi sono chiesto, stai a vedere che sono veramente un discendente di questo grande pittore. Ci hanno fatto la prova del DNA tramite il prelievo della saliva e praticamente poi hanno continuato le ricerche sulle ossa eccetera, e alla fine hanno stabilito che noi Merisio eravamo tutti parenti, tutti discendenti di uno stesso ceppo che sicuramente era originario di Caravaggio.
They tested 20 Merisio, and to their surprise, all of them had DNA markers that matched those found in Caravaggio's bones. Even more unexpectedly, the painter's creativity seemed to have passed down through the generations to several of his descendants. Besides the painter, there was a historian and a well-known photographer.
Dunque, io faccio il fotografo dal 55. Certi critici hanno sottolineato questo fatto e hanno detto che io fotografo come Michelangelo dipingeva. Ora io ci rido su perché le cose sono così sproporzionate, però ci può essere un qualcosina di vero, cioè nell'aver capito che la luce è quella che fa tutto.
Alberto and Pepi are proud to be descendants of one of the greatest painters in history, but they say they want to be remembered for their own art.
Well, wouldn't it be nice to be a descendant of a famous artist? That was NBC's Claudio Lavanga reporting there. Well, thank you for joining us in Good Morning Europe today. Stay with Euronews for all of your top stories, and we'll leave you with today's No Comment from Quito in Ecuador and the annual Fiesta de la Luz, the Festival of Lights.